The difference between Black Americans and immigrants is stark, yet often misunderstood. Black Americans were forced to be cheap labor slaves in the United States, torn from their homelands and stripped of agency. Their arrival was not a choice, but a brutal imposition, a foundation built on suffering for the benefit of others. In contrast, immigrants arrive by choice, often seeking opportunity, validation, and the elusive promise of inclusion within the American dream. Yet, for many, that dream is shaped and constrained by the enduring shadow of white supremacy. While immigrants may willingly enter into harsh realities for a chance at acceptance, Black Americans were never given that choice. Their legacy is not one of seeking entry but of surviving captivity, forced to build a nation that still struggles to see them as equals. There is a profound and honestly bitter irony at the heart of the Black American experience. It's an irony born of whips and chains, of stolen lives and forced voyages across a vast ocean. The ancestors of today's Black Americans did not choose to come to this land. They were captured, shackled, and packed into the suffocating hulls of slave ships. They were brought here against their will, their labor stolen to build the wealth of a nation that refused to see them as human. They were forcibly imported, a human commodity to be bought and sold for the enrichment of others. They were not immigrants seeking a new life. They were captives brought to a new prison. Fast forward to 2025. And the descendants of these enslaved people find themselves in a peculiar and cruel predicament. The country that once forced their ancestors onto its shores now holds them in a different kind of bondage. While the government works to expel new immigrants with ruthless efficiency, Black Americans who wish to leave find themselves trapped. They are citizens, yes, but their citizenship feels like a cage. To leave the country, even for a vacation, they must first ask for permission. They must apply for a passport, a document granted by the very same government that presides over a system that oppresses them daily. The power dynamic remains shifted but unbroken. The contrast is staggering and deeply painful. The journey to America for their ancestors was a forced march, a brutal passage that cost nothing in dollars but everything in dignity and freedom. Today, the journey out of America requires significant financial resources. One must pay the government for the passport, then pay corporate airlines hundreds or thousands of dollars for a plane ticket. The freedom to leave is not a right but really a privilege, one that is often out of reach for communities that have been systematically impoverished for generations. The chains are no longer made of iron, but they're just as real, forged from bureaucracy and economic disparity. This situation creates a painful paradox. Black Americans are told they are an integral part of the nation, yet they're treated as a perpetual underclass. They are taxed for their labor, their wealth extracted to fund a system that often works against their interests. They are told to be patriotic, to love a country that has never fully loved them back. And when the weight of this history and the pain of the present become too much to bear, when the desire to escape becomes overwhelming, they find the exits are guarded. They're trapped in a house their ancestors were forced to build, a house that still refuses to treat them as equal members of the family. The dream of leaving, of finding a place where one's existence is not a constant struggle, is a powerful one for many Black Americans. But this dream crashes against the hard reality of modern borders and state control. The first hurdle is the passport. It's a simple booklet, but it represents the state's authority over its subjects. To obtain one, a citizen must prove their identity and pay a fee to the government. This process, which may seem routine to some, is a galling reminder of one's subordinate position. It's an act of asking for permission to travel from the very entity that perpetuates the injustices one seeks to escape. It is, in a way, a formal request to the warden for a temporary leave from the prison yard. Once permission is granted in the form of a passport, the next barrier is money. International travel is a luxury, an expense that is far beyond the reach of millions of Americans, particularly those in communities that have been economically marginalized for centuries. The cost of a single plane ticket to a country in Africa, the ancestral homeland for many, can be equivalent to several months' rent or a down payment on a car. This financial wall is a direct consequence of the systemic economic discrimination that has limited wealth creation in Black communities. The legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and mass incarceration is not just a social burden, it is an economic one that keeps the gates of the world closed. Think back to the slave ships. The journey across the Atlantic was a business transaction for the captors, but for the captured, It was a terrifying, unpaid passage into bondage. The shipping companies were paid to transport human cargo to a life of forced, unpaid labor. There was no fee for the enslaved, only the ultimate price of their freedom. Today, the descendants of those people must pay commercial airlines, massive corporations that profit from global mobility, for the privilege of crossing that same ocean in the opposite direction. They must purchase their own passage out of a land their ancestors were brought to for free to generate free labor. The economic injustice of the past echoes loudly in the present. This entire system highlights a fundamental truth. Black Americans are viewed as a resource to be managed, not as free individuals with full autonomy. In the 18th and 19th centuries, they were a source of labor. Today, their presence is tolerated as long as it serves the needs of the dominant power structure. They are taxpayers, consumers, and soldiers. But the moment they seek true self-determination, whether through political power at home or the freedom to leave, they encounter obstacles. The government that claims them as citizens simultaneously restricts their movement, ensuring that their bodies remain within the economic and political borders of the United States, a nation they were forced to build but are still not free to leave. The assault on Black Americans in 2025 is not just physical or economic, it's a calculated attack on their very history and identity. The Trump administration has launched a campaign to erase Black culture from the public square and the educational system, seeking to sever the connection between the present generation and the struggles of their ancestors. One of the most symbolic and damaging policies has been the termination of all federal funding for diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. These initiatives, designed to address historical inequalities and promote a more inclusive environment in workplaces and schools, are now being dismantled under the guise of ending so-called divisive concepts. It is a direct effort to halt any progress toward a more equitable society. This cultural war extends into the classroom, where the minds of the next generation are shaped. The administration has moved to end the national recognition of Black History Month, a long-standing tradition meant to honor the contributions and history of Black Americans. This is not merely a symbolic gesture, it is a powerful statement that Black history is not American history, that it is secondary and disposable. Furthermore, Black studies programs in federally funded schools and universities are being systematically defunded and removed from curricula. The message is clear. The story of Black struggle, resilience, and achievement is a story that this administration does not want to be told. It is an attempt to create a sanitized version of American history, one without its original sin. The erasure is not confined to textbooks and classrooms, it is happening on the streets. In a shocking move, the administration has begun to actively reward the destruction of monuments and landmarks dedicated to Black history and the Black Lives Matter movement. Where communities once erected statues and murals to honor figures of the civil rights struggle, or to remember victims of police violence, they now face the threat of state-sanctioned vandalism. This policy sends a terrifying signal to white supremacist and extremist groups, effectively giving them a green light to destroy symbols of Black identity with impunity. It is a physical and psychological attack meant to demoralize and intimidate. These actions are part of a broader, more insidious strategy. By erasing the past, the administration seeks to control the present and the future. If people do not know their history, they cannot understand the systemic nature of their oppression. If there are no reminders of the fight for civil rights, it becomes easier to pretend that the fight is over. If the very language of diversity and equity is banned, it becomes impossible to even discuss the problems of racism and inequality. This is not just a series of isolated policies, it is a coordinated effort to enforce a national amnesia to render Black Americans invisible in the story of the nation they helped build. For many Black Americans, life in 2025 feels like living in a state of constant siege. The grand political policies enacted in Washington, D.C. are not just abstract concepts, they translate into daily realities of fear, humiliation, and violence. The most immediate and terrifying threat comes from the police. With the administration granting law enforcement agencies full immunity for their actions, the specter of police brutality looms larger than ever. Every traffic stop, every walk through a park, every interaction with an officer, it all carries the potential for escalation, violence, or even death. The lack of accountability has emboldened the worst impulses within law enforcement. turning neighborhood patrols into, honestly, occupying forces in black communities. This is not justice, it is state-sanctioned terror. But the feeling of being unsafe extends beyond just encounters with the police. The concept of sundown towns, places where black people were historically warned to leave by nightfall under threat of violence, has sadly seen a grim resurgence. While not always enforced by official signs, the hostile atmosphere in many predominantly white rural and suburban areas serves the same purpose. Black travelers report being followed, harassed, or intimidated, a constant reminder that their freedom of movement is conditional, and that their presence is seen as a threat. This kind of pervasive racism creates invisible borders within the country, limiting where black people can live, work, and travel without fear for their safety. And this siege is also economic. Federal housing subsidies, which are a lifeline for many low-income families, have been severely underfunded and cut. This has led to a predictable and devastating rise in homelessness within the black community. Families who were already struggling to make ends meet are now being pushed out of their homes and onto the streets, with little to no safety net to catch them. This is not a failure of the system, it is the system working as intended. By removing support structures, the administration is exacerbating the economic precarity that has plagued Black America for generations, making it even harder to build stable lives and secure a future for their children. The cumulative effect of these daily struggles is a profound sense of exhaustion and despair. It's the weight of always being on guard, of having to teach your children how to survive an encounter with the police, of seeing the doors of opportunity closed simply because of the color of your skin. It's the pain of knowing that the country you call home sees you as a problem to be managed, rather than a citizen to be valued. And, this is the reality that fuels the desire to leave, to find a place where one can simply breathe without the constant pressure of racism and the threat of violence. It is a search for a peace that seems impossible to find in America. The American justice system has long been a tool of control against the black community, and in 2025, its grip has tightened into a stranglehold. The promise of reparations for the centuries of stolen labor and systemic discrimination has been officially and scornfully dismissed by the administration. This denial is more than just a political decision. It is a profound moral statement. It declares that the historical debts owed to Black America will never be paid, that the wealth built on the backs of enslaved ancestors will remain in the hands of those who benefited from that brutal system. It is a final, definitive closing of a door that was never truly open, cementing the economic disparity between Black and white America for generations to come. In place of reparations, the government has doubled down on policies that lead to mass incarceration. The so-called tough-on-crime rhetoric has been revived, leading to harsher sentencing laws and increased policing in black neighborhoods. The for-profit prison industry, which relies on a steady supply of bodies to generate revenue, is flourishing. Young black men and women are being funneled into this system at an alarming rate, often for minor, non-violent offenses. A single mistake can lead to a lifetime of consequences, stripping them of their right to vote, their ability to find employment, and their chance to build a stable life. The prison has become a modern-day plantation, a place where black bodies are warehoused and controlled. This cycle of incarceration feeds a devastating economic despair. When a significant portion of a community is locked away or burdened with a criminal record, it becomes nearly impossible to build collective wealth. Families are torn apart, potential earners are removed from the economy, and a cloud of hopelessness settles over entire neighborhoods. The jobs that are available are often low-wage, with little opportunity for advancement. This economic exclusion is not an accident. It is the intended outcome of a system designed to maintain a racial hierarchy, ensuring that Black Americans remain a permanent economic underclass, dependent and disempowered. The irony is that Black Americans are still expected to contribute to this system through their taxes. Their labor is taxed to fund the very police departments that harass them, the courts that convict them, and the prisons that incarcerate them. They are forced to pay for their own oppression. This constant extraction of wealth, combined with the denial of historical justice and the reality of mass incarceration, creates a powerful incentive to seek and escape. The desire to self-deport is not a rejection of a homeland, it is a rejection of a system that has been relentlessly hostile for over 400 years. It is a rational response to an irrational and deeply unjust situation. Faced with this relentless onslaught of political, economic, and social oppression, a growing number of Black Americans are embracing a radical idea: self-deportation. This term, once used by politicians to describe a strategy of making life so difficult for undocumented immigrants that they would choose to leave, has been reclaimed. For Black Americans, it represents a conscious and deliberate decision to leave the United States in search of a new home, often in an African nation. It is not an act of surrender, but an act of self-preservation and a quest for dignity. It is the ultimate rejection of the American experiment, a declaration that the promise of equality has been broken beyond repair. This desire to leave is fueled by a deep sense of alienation. After centuries of struggle, sacrifice, and contribution, many feel that they are still not seen as true Americans. They built the country's economy with their unpaid labor, fought in its wars, and enriched its culture with their art and music. Yet they are still subjected to police brutality, economic exploitation, and a political system that seeks to erase their history. The feeling is one of being a permanent guest in someone else's house, a guest who is tolerated at best and despised at worst. The dream of self-deportation is a dream of finally finding a place to call home. A place where their blackness is not a liability but a source of strength and belonging. However, the path to self-deportation is fraught with obstacles. As discussed, the financial and bureaucratic barriers are significant. One cannot simply pack a bag and leave. It requires resources, planning, and permission from the very government one is trying to escape. This creates a cruel irony. The system that makes life unbearable also makes it difficult to leave. Furthermore, the decision to uproot one's life and move to a new continent is not an easy one. It means leaving behind family, friends, and the only home one has ever known, even if that home has been a hostile one. It is a monumental undertaking, born not of a casual desire for adventure, but of a desperate need for peace. Ultimately, the call for self-deportation is a powerful indictment of the United States. It is a cry for liberation from a new generation of Black Americans who are unwilling to wait for a promise that may never be fulfilled. They have watched their parents and grandparents fight for civil rights, only to see that progress rolled back by a reactionary political movement. They have concluded that the system is not broken, but is in fact working exactly as it was designed to. And so they look across the ocean, not as their ancestors did in chains, but with a hope for a future where they can be free, a future they may have to build for themselves, far from the shores of America. For some African Americans, the phrase, "I wish I could be deported," is not a flippant remark, but a profound reflection of frustration and longing. In a nation where immigration enforcement is wielded as a threat, the irony is that many Black citizens, whose ancestors were forcibly brought here, now find themselves wishing for the option to leave under government sanction. This wish is born from exhaustion, with a system that seems engineered to diminish Black lives, and with the daily reminders that despite centuries of contribution, belonging is never guaranteed. For many, watching ICE raids and forced removals on the news evokes a complicated mix of empathy and envy. The reality is that, unlike immigrants who may be eligible for deportation, African Americans have no legal pathway to official exile. There is no government agency to process their pain or facilitate their departure. The motivations behind this sentiment are complex. Some seek an escape from relentless discrimination, economic marginalization, and the trauma of generational injustice. Others dream of starting anew in a country where their Blackness might be a source of pride, not persecution. It is a hope for the possibility of belonging, somewhere, anywhere, on their own terms, but beneath this wish lies a deeper truth. It is not about abandoning America, but about seeking the dignity and safety that the nation has failed to provide. It is a quiet rebellion against the myth of progress, a refusal to wait for a justice that never comes. For these individuals, the fantasy of deportation is both a coping mechanism and a political statement, a way to articulate the depth of their alienation and the urgency of their hope for something better. In the end, the longing for deportation is not a desire to flee, but a desperate plea to be seen, valued, and free. It is a testament to the enduring resilience of a people who, even as they contemplate leaving, still dream of a home where they can finally belong. The story of Black America is a story of profound contradiction. It is the story of a people who were the architects and builders of a nation that refuses to acknowledge their full humanity. From the cotton fields of the South to the industrial factories of the North, black labor was the engine of American prosperity. They were foundational to the country's creation and its rise to global power. Their blood, sweat, and tears are mixed into the very soil of the land. The White House itself, the ultimate symbol of American power, was constructed with the labor of enslaved black people. Every corner of the nation bears the imprint of their unwilling sacrifice and their resilient creativity. Yet despite this undeniable contribution, black Americans have been consistently treated as outsiders. The rights and privileges of citizenship have been granted grudgingly and often taken away. They are told to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, while their boots have been nailed to the floor by centuries of systemic oppression. They are asked to have faith in a justice system that disproportionately incarcerates them and to trust a political system that actively works to disenfranchise them. The message delivered through policy and practice is that they are builders who are not welcome in the house they helped construct. They are expected to maintain the foundation but are denied a room of their own. The current political climate in 2025 has brought this contradiction into its sharpest focus. The policies of the Trump administration are not just attacks on immigrants or minorities, they are an attack on the very idea of a multicultural America. By erasing black history, rewarding the destruction of black monuments, and dismantling programs designed to promote equity, the government is attempting to rewrite the nation's story. It is an effort to create a narrative in which the contributions of black Americans are minimized and their grievances are dismissed as illegitimate. This leaves black citizens in an impossible position. How do you maintain allegiance to a country that is actively trying to erase you from its story? This is why the fantasy of self-deportation has taken hold. It is the logical conclusion for a people who have given everything to a nation and received so little in return. It is a rejection of the unending struggle for recognition and a search for a place where one's value is not constantly in question. The great tragedy is that America is losing the very people who gave it so much of its character, its strength, and its soul. The builders are contemplating walking away from the building, not because they want to, but because the structure itself has become toxic and uninhabitable. The question for America is not whether it can afford to let them go, but whether it can survive without them.